Okay, everybody, it is 2 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Ashley Shannon. I'm the Operational Excellence Leader here at the State Emergency Management Agency. I see that not a lot of people are on right now, but they can join as we go. I just hope there's not some technical difficulty that they're having like I had last time Marcia presented with us. So Marcia Davis with the Department of Health and Senior Services is our host today. She will be presenting on identifying and assisting at-risk groups. Marcia, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Ashley. Thank you all for joining me this afternoon. As Ashley mentioned, my name is Marcia Davis. I am the Senior Emergency Management Officer for the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services within the Division of Senior and Disability Services. I've been with the department almost 18 years, and I'm responsible for making sure that the division is prepared to respond to and recover from any emergency or disaster. So in an emergency or disaster, not having the ability or not knowing how to assist every person in our community, that keeps me up at night. Which groups are at risk? Where do they live and work? What resources are available to them? If you have ever asked yourself those questions during an emergency or disaster, let me know in the chat. Today, I'm going to be sharing some best practice strategies to help you identify, locate, and assist those most at risk in your community. I do want this to be a conversation, so I don't know everything. So if you have a nugget to share with the group, please use the chat function to help us out with these resources. One key lesson that we learned during Hurricane Katrina in 2005 was that the traditional methods of communicating health and emergency information falls short of the goal of reaching everyone in a community. And 17 years later, while some improvements have been made, we are still falling short of that goal. High-risk populations are often left struggling to receive or understand emergency information. So as we talk about high risk, I might use the term high risk, vulnerable population. I use them kind of interchangeably. So when we think about it, who actually is a high risk population? You know, what does that even mean? We typically think in narrow terms. We think about our seniors. We think about our non-English speaking residents. We think about those folks with disabilities, or maybe those who are isolated or electric dependent. Actually, a vulnerable or more at-risk individual is anyone who needs assistance due to any condition or circumstance that creates a barrier to their understanding of or their ability to act or react during an emergency, right? So when you use this definition, you might find that you have more vulnerable at-risk individuals in your community than those who may be more unaffected by a disaster or an emergency. So if we change our perception about who we consider to be at risk, this allows you to start reframing how you communicate generally instead of targeting specific groups. Because our goal really is to ensure that every person who lives, works, or even travels through our community is able to access and understand information and instructions during an emergency. Because as we know, emergencies are not planned. They can happen anytime. And I am from Morgan County. This coming weekend, Versailles is going to have their annual Apple Festival. Our emergency managers normally plan for about 2,500 people. That's about the number of folks that live in Versailles. This weekend, we're going to have 30,000 people. So making sure that all of those visitors can access and understand our emergency information is critical. If you think of your at-risk populations through that narrow lens of just older adults or just physically and mentally impaired, it's inefficient and ineffective to try to have different communication strategies for each group. Instead, I want to challenge you to think about grouping your community population into broader categories, and I call them population buckets. So you have an economically disadvantaged portion of your community, right? These are your low wage earners. They could be your seasonal workers. They could be your unemployed folks. Now, economic disadvantage does not necessarily impair the ability of someone to receive the information, but it may significantly affect their ability to follow a directive, right? If the individual just doesn't have the resources or means to do what we're asking them to do. For example, they may not be able to stockpile food, or they may not be able to stay away from work and lose a day's pay, right? Language and literacy is another population bucket we need to think about. This category includes members of our communities who have a limited ability to read, speak, or write English. Maybe they just have low literacy skills in general, or maybe they can't read at all, either English or in their native language. It's important to consider language and literacy when you develop public health messages. We all know that to ensure that everyone can understand the information and follow public health directives, the information has to be accessible to everybody. We have our medical and disability bucket, and this includes obviously those individuals who have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. The most easily recognized are those who are blind or deaf or hard of hearing, as well as those with conditions that limit mobility or make them dependent on electricity. What we often forget, though, as emergency managers, we forget those folks who are temporarily suffering an impairment, right? Maybe they've got a broken leg. Maybe you've got somebody that's recovering from surgery that has limited mobility. Maybe somebody's had eye surgery and their eyes, they've got patches over their eyes and they're unable to see temporarily. Isolation, either geographical, cultural, or social, is another population bucket to think about. And there are many ways that folks can be isolated, which you might not even think about when you think about your population. Think about your farmers, your ranchers, or the people who live in a sparsely populated community. This can create additional challenges because many of those folks depend on cable television, and sometimes those cable television stations, they don't provide local news. I'm one of those people. Again, I live in Morgan County. I live on a farm. I get cable, but I don't have any local news stations. I can't turn on the TV and find any information about what is going on in Morgan County. So I have to have another way to get that information. Maybe you're in an urban area, maybe you're in St. Louis, Kansas City, Columbia. Maybe you've got folks there that are isolated because they are afraid of the violence that's outside, right? So they're not leaving their home. Maybe your population includes a military base or a university, and you've got a lot of temporary residents. Or maybe you have an Amish or Mennonite community. They don't rely on mass communication at all. So these are just some population buckets to kind of be thinking about. And remember too that individuals typically fall into more than one category. Um, for example, you may have an individual that's got a cognitive disability and they're not able to understand complex um, directions. So they're falling into that language bucket and that medical disability bucket. Or you may have a seasonal worker who doesn't use English as their primary language. So who's in your community, right? How do we find that out? And I'm not talking here about the state as a whole. I'm talking about your individual community. To be truly successful and to reach the largest number of folks in your community, you need to know who they are. You need to understand the unique demographics that's represented in your jurisdiction. Now, unfortunately, this is going to take a little work on your part. There's no magic wand for this piece of it, but there are free tools that can help you. And I've got some on the screen here, and of course, I'll make sure that Ashley has this information as well. Many of you may know about the HHS Empower Map. This map provides de-identified data down to the zip code level concerning the 2.7 million Medicare beneficiaries who rely on electric-dependent medical and assistive equipment. This map is free and it's very user-friendly. The department, we have several data sources that are wrapped up in the Missouri Public Health Information Management System, or what we call the MOFIMS. This is your county level profiles, chronic disease profiles, population information, environmental profiles. You can generally get what you need for your emergency management planning for free. Of course, if you want to drill down to personally identified data, that's a whole nother deal. And that requires you to submit all kinds of paperwork. But that's not necessary to get the information that you need, right? You can just go out there to MOFIMS, you can search the databases, and we have staff. If you can't figure it out how to work it, we've got staff that can help you. The Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System, or what we call BRFIS, this is an ongoing telephone survey of adults, and it's coordinated by the CDC. And this survey collects information on health conditions, on behaviors, on preventive practices. There is a gold mine of information in that BRFIS survey. Again, that is free. It's out on our website. We have folks that can help you navigate it if you need to. That too is pretty user-friendly. And many of you may be familiar with the Social Vulnerability Index. And this is just an index that documents the social vulnerability of an area. And it helps us emergency managers identify the communities or the areas within our communities that might need support or more support before, during, and after a disaster. The data here is down to the census tract level, and it includes all kinds of stuff, socioeconomic status, household composition, race, ethnicity, language. So using some of these tools will help you get some specific details about the individuals actually living in your own jurisdiction. Let me back up just a second. Okay, I wanted to make sure I didn't miss something. Now that you have a general idea of who's in your community, how are you going to find them, right? How are you going to actually know where they are? The most obvious way is to reach out to the agencies and organizations within your own community that already serve these at-risk and vulnerable populations. For example, your local health departments. Those folks know who's enrolled in the SNAP and WIC programs, right? You've got your food pantries. You've got your faith-based groups, especially those that have missions or ministries that provide services to members of the community. I know my own church, we've got a fund where we help folks, pay their utility bills or pay their rent or whatever the situation may be. Your local schools. Now, I'm here to tell you that your school nurses, they are a wealth of information about the children and subsequently the families that they care for. Your school nurses know a lot about who's in your community. Of course, your home health agencies, your EMS and fire department personnel, they know who's at risk in your community. You also have national organizations sometimes working in your community. Maybe you've got Salvation Army, Red Cross, United Way, Catholic Charities, and then soup kitchens or senior centers, right, that serve meals. They know the population that they serve and they know where these folks are. So those of you that are online, if you have any additional organizations, especially ones that are local that you can think of that might help, please share it in the chat. And I do see, Ashley, your comment there about the health department, which brings me to my next slide, actually. Most of these organizations are not going to be able to give you specific personal information, but they can give you general information that's very helpful, right? They can tell you who the population is that they serve, right? And where do these folks gather, right? Is there a certain spot that they all gather in their own neighborhood? How do these folks receive emergency information? What's the best way to convey that information to this group? And this is huge. Who are their trusted sources? And we'll talk about this in just a moment, but these at-risk populations that these groups are serving, who do they trust to get their information from? And are there other organizations that might serve the same group? So as you begin to reach out and collect this information, because like I said, there's no magic way to get it. You're just going to have to do a little bit of work. But as you begin to reach out and collect this information, you are also building that network of people and trusted leaders who can help get the information out in an emergency. And you want to capture this information, and you can put it in a simple spreadsheet. You can create a map if you have GIS resources. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just a list of who these trusted sources are. Now, my very last point here, there is free software. I don't know if any of you have used it at batchgeo.com that will allow you to make basic PIN maps. They do have a paid version, but if you just need basic PIN maps, you can get that, you can do it for free on batchgeo.com. You have to upload a spreadsheet giving them the information, and then it's like magic. It just like spits it out. So you've done a little bit of work and you know who's in your community. You kind of know where they are. How are you going to reach them now? Right? We know where they are. We know kind of who they are. As I mentioned before, those trusted leaders, right? Trust plays a critical role in reaching our at-risk and vulnerable populations. Reaching people through channels that they trust has shown to be much more effective than through mainstream channels. For many people, and I know that I'm one of them, trusted information comes more readily from within our community rather than from external sources, and word of mouth is often the most effective. So, through your conversations with the community agencies and organizations who serve the populations you are concerned about, they can help you identify those trusted individuals. It's important to know that the trusted individual may not be serving in any official capacity, and they may not even be known to you, but they can serve as a channel for information during an emergency. In some ethnic populations, these leaders tend to be small business owners. It's the barber, the hairstylist, the convenience store owners. These are folks that the community trusts. To have a successful emergency communication strategy, you have to engage these trusted sources. And, we have found that many of them are willing. You just need to ask them. Also, your churches, your mosques, or other houses of worship, they are often places where individuals of various cultural and ethnic backgrounds gather to discuss the community needs, political opinions, employment opportunities, etc. These are the places that can provide the information to their members. Don't forget community elders or matriarchs. And the ethnic media community is usually underestimated. Even when members of an intended audience have access to the mainstream media, they are far more responsive to messages delivered by a person from a similar cultural or ethnic group. And another often overlooked asset that you have in your community is digital signage. Whether it's a business like the bank or the school, think about leveraging those neon signs when you have an emergency message you need to get out. And if you all have any other ideas on how to reach this population or at-risk populations in general, just throw it in the chat for all to benefit from. In an emergency, public information must meet the needs of everybody in order to be effective. So we're thinking about those buckets, right? Those population buckets. We're not going to break down our communication strategies by buckets. We're going to make them kind of a one-size-fits-all. And we're going to do that by keeping our messages simple and concise. Use short sentences. Use plain language. I can't impress upon you enough about the plain language because that makes it easy for translation of materials. Consider 6th grade reading level or even lower, because you need to keep in mind that some children act as interpreters for their parents and for other older adults. So the kids have to be able to read and understand the messages. You want to provide, of course, written materials in bilingual or multilingual form if that applies to your jurisdiction, and include visual aids such as pictures and maps. And I have to tell you this story about pictures and map that just happened to me last week, and a coworker, as a matter of fact. Now, keep in mind we work at the Department of Health. I am not multilingual. I only speak English. And we had to do something, and the instructions were in Spanish. We didn't have any English instructions. And neither one of us could read or understand Spanish. We had no Spanish speakers here, but it had pictures. And we were able to just follow the pictures to get done what we needed to get done. So giving that picture is really a huge thing. You want to use large fonts. Don't worry about making it pretty or using scripted fonts or making it small. Use large fonts so people can read it. And then think about the preferred method for your jurisdiction, right? Do you need to get the information to the barber? Do you need to get it to the ethnic radio station? Do you need to get it to the church pastor? Put it on the bank neon sign? What is going to work in your community? So moving forward, just start small. Start small. Begin to identify your demographics, who's in your community, and those trusted community leaders. You want to start building and sustaining those partnerships with members of your information network. You want to provide an avenue for those trusted leaders to participate in the decisions that directly affect their communities, right? And you want to increase their awareness about the other cultural and social diversity that's in your jurisdiction they may not be aware of. And demonstrating your commitment to ensuring their safety is huge. You have to demonstrate your commitment to them. You want to provide opportunities for that whole community participation. Ask those trusted leaders to identify the information needs of their community. How do they need the information? What format? Who's going to deliver it? Ask them for those ideas about how best to reach their folks during an emergency, because that's what we're really trying to do. Invite them to participate in your exercises. If you do post-exercise evaluations, which I hope that you do, and write those after-action reports, invite these trusted leaders to sit in on that. They can tell you what worked and what didn't work for their folks. And work with them to include information in your preparedness and communication plans that will work for their community. And you will find that simple is better. And the more simple you can make it, the more folks you're going to reach. And of course, you know, mistakes are going to be made. That's just the way it is. Just learn from it, move forward. After an event happens, just ask yourself, and you're doing this anyway as emergency managers when you do your after action report, what worked as planned? What didn't work? Were those community leaders, those trusted folks, did we reach them? Did we get the information to them? Did we leave anybody out? Who else might need to be included? What reactions or actions or factors did we fail to anticipate? And where can we improve? It's always, as you know, an emergency manager or emergency management, it's always living documents. We are always learning from the mistakes that we make. We just don't want to keep repeating the same mistakes. Now let's talk a little bit about resources for our at-risk populations, right? Because this is what keeps me up at night. Once a disaster happens, finding assistance for someone who needs something that you don't have, that is not only time consuming, but it is very frustrating because we want to be able to help them. We want to be able to help everyone in our jurisdiction. So here on the screen are just some things for you to think about. There are organizations that can help you run down these needed resources. You don't have to do this. If it's a big event, the American Red Cross and the Salvation Army are going to be on site, right? I'm sure many of you have worked with both of those groups. These organizations have individuals that are specifically tasked with finding resources, right? You don't have to find them. These folks can. But if it's a smaller event, or maybe while you're waiting for the Red Cross and the Salvation Army to arrive, who are you going to call, right? If you don't have a direct contact with state organizations like Catholic Charities, Missouri Baptist, contact SEMA. The SEMA folks can put you in touch with all of our voluntary organizations, and they can assist with everything from removing down trees, tarping roofs, providing cleanup supplies, providing meals. We have probably one of the best network of organizations, voluntary organizations in the country. Missouri has just got the absolute best network of organizations. These folks can be in your community within hours, right? Sometimes the Red Cross is going to take a day or two, so same with Salvation Army. Our state organizations can be to you within a matter of hours. Locally, United Waste 211 serves all of Missouri, right? They work with us on a state level, and they have huge resource database, and they can connect you with just about anything you need. And I want to talk to you about something you may not think about, and that is the Department of Health staff. We have home and community-based service staff in every single county in the state. Their purpose is really to assess individuals that are requesting in-home services. I mean, that's their everyday job. We also have adult protective service workers that cover every county. These are the folks that are tasked with investigating claims of abuse and neglect of our seniors and adults with disabilities. You may already know some of these folks, I don't know. But while none of our staff are specifically disaster focused, by virtue of their job, they have a wealth of information and they are familiar with local resources, the resources that are in your county or available to your county. Whether it's locating durable medical equipment or locating an interpreter, our staff knows how to do that. They know how to access those resources. They are a great resource for you during an emergency. Now, generally, your local public health agency will know who these folks are if you don't. But if they don't know and you can't find out, you contact me. I can connect you to our staff in your county and get to know them before something happens. This is my contact information. I am always available to you. I'm a resource for you also. Please feel free to reach out to me for anything that I can help you with. We can brainstorm ways of finding out who's in your community, maybe ways to get in touch with them. I'm always available to visit with you and to share what I know. And with that, that is the end of my presentation. If there are any questions, I am happy to take them.
And you can either drop the questions for Marcia into the chat, or if you raise your hand, I can help you get unmuted so you can act out loud and have more of a discussion. Also, I have the links in the chat for those 4 resources that you shared, Marcia, so people can copy and paste those if they need them.
Great, thank you so much. If you think of something after the presentation, shoot me an email. You can always call me. It's easier to get me via email, but I always return my phone calls.
Okay, well, if nobody has any questions, I will give you guys back about 30 minutes of your day. Marcia, I'm going to go ahead and hang on the line just in case anyone's typing a longer question. But I want to thank you very much for, this is your second presentation of September, so I really appreciate you and your information sharing and all of that. So thank you for being with us today.
Absolutely. Glad I could be with you all. Thank you so much.
You have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.